stream to YouTube. Okay, guys, the YouTube stream is up, and I'll make the Facebook Live just in a moment here. Okay, guys, so it looks like Facebook is now live as well. I just got to do a sound test and connect the chat, but I'll turn the mic over to Max very shortly, too. So thank you for anyone who might be joining us. We'll be starting the show very soon. We have a fantastic episode tonight, doing a little, Republican house cleaning, in a sense, or at least speculating on the future, see what needs to change, but it's going to be an awesome conversation, so... absolutely, as always, we welcome you to comment below the video and, be heard. So we'll put your comments on screen. And if you care about the party, spread the word. This is involves you. So we'll be starting very soon. And I'm going to switch the mic to Max right now.
Welcome to Black and Blue with AK and Officer Jai. I am AK Kamara.
And I'm Jai Jensen.
How you doing, brother?
Good. How are you?
You have a good Thanksgiving?
I had a great Thanksgiving. I worked with a couple of good partners of mine, and it was a good time.
Yeah, man. People that follow me on social media probably seen my post. My mother is in the hospital right now, and we just ask that if you care about us or you care about my mother, please give your thoughts and prayers that God's will be done. I don't want to start this on a down note, but this is real life. I believe that life is precious, and regardless of the state that my mother is in, her life is precious, her life matters. And so myself, my wife, my siblings, our family, just ask that you keep my mother and us in your prayers. Not to start off on such a negative note, but I just want to let people know, too, that we understood that this was a long time coming, and so we're prepared as you can be. But again, thank you everyone for all the love and support that you've poured out so far. Continue to do that, and if you ever have anything that you want to shout out or give us anything, just always feel free to reach out to me or to any of my siblings. But this is Black and Blue with AK and Officer Jai, and this show really is about making sure that we have honest and candid conversations about the things that beat us up in life, whether that's coming from the mainstream media, whether that's coming from social media, whether that's coming from just political opponents that disagree with your position on conventional wisdom. And one of our main purposes is to try and have a conversation to remove those caricatures, to show the realness of people. Because let's be honest, when you strip it all down, we're just a bunch of human beings bumping around on this plane of existence, trying to figure out to live our life the best way that we can. And so today we have two guests that encapsulate that perfectly, that you probably know a lot about if you pay attention to politics in Minnesota. But before that, I know Jai has a shout out he wants to give.
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to a friend of the show who's been on, local musician Tim Sigler. Kind of wanted to make our set a little more festive. Got us the real Santa up here. So
yes, we have a black Santa. All right, Santa is in the eye of the beholder.
Well, I would like to say real Santa.
Real Santa. And so shout out to Tim Sigler. He does live
for
shows.
Thinking of us.
Thinking of us?
Yeah. So he does a show every Sunday in Stillwater at Ziggy's from 3 to 6.
3 to 6.
Check them out. The staff there is great. Fred, and they got a server there named Jai. She is the second
Her name is Jai too?
best looking Jai I ever met. The second one. Yeah. So it's a good time, great food, great atmosphere, and great music. So go check them out.
And also make sure to hit that like button, hit the share button. We have a great conversation that we're going to be having live here. Make sure you put your comments and questions in the chat. We're going to pull comments and questions out throughout the chat. But again, thank you. And to get this thing started, want to introduce Max Rymer.
Hello.
Now, I've known Max for a while. Some bona fides. You were an RNC committeeman for a while.
Yes.
You are the president of a digital strategy, or what would you call it?
Yeah, digital marketing web development agency.
And so you're kind of all in, and most recently you spent a significant portion of your time and energy on the Dr. Scott Jensen and Matt Burke ticket for governor and lieutenant governor, correct?
That's right.
Right on, man.
Big reason I stepped down as national committee man was to take an elevated position on this campaign. Glad I did.
Right on. So we got Max joining us. Thank you for being on the show. And then, of course, we have Dr. Scott Jensen. Again, if you've paid any attention to politics, hopefully, you know who he is. He was characterized as extreme and evil and all these different things. But, things didn't work out on Election Day of 2022 in Minnesota. But I appreciate you stopping by the show so we can have a real conversation about, one, what happened. Okay, like I think that's a question that every person that thinks that you would do a better job as governor and that had a lot of high hopes, that's kind of the burning question. And I don't think we're going to be able to get a specific answer, but maybe we can scratch a little bit of the surface. And then two, what do we do from here? So again, thank you so much, Dr. Jensen, for being on and stopping by, and let's have a great conversation.
Thank you, AK and Jai, for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just kind of jump right off the, right from the jump. Max, you're a guy that's, you're analytical, right? Like it's your job to understand how things move. And obviously there's certain things that you had privy information to working from a campaign side. If you had to say top level, what were like two big things that did not go the way that you had either hoped they would go or anticipated they would go?
It's a good question. I think, and the position I held with the Dr. Scott Jensen for governor campaign was general consultant, which essentially meant that, running strategic initiatives, some messaging angles, figuring out what staffing would look like, and then managing budget at that point, expenditures, how we wanted to advertise, things of that nature. And I usually, as I've processed over the last 3 weeks, and at the very beginning, it's hard to be objective about anything that you're doing just because it's so fresh and raw and you invest so much in the campaign that I think it breaks down into two kind of cycles of what could we control and what could we not control. I think those are two elements of maybe what went wrong in this campaign. So maybe 1 to 2 points for each.
Sure.
What we controlled was, at times, and Scott and I had talked about this, we've talked numerous times about, hey, what's next and what went wrong. at some point in time, the candidates are what I thought would work in Minnesota, and what I was really enamored with both Scott Jensen and Matt Burke on was that they were both real people, and they both editorialized and they both said their position, and then they would also be willing to have real conversations. And I thought Minnesotans were ready for that. I thought Americans were ready for that. And then at times it did get us in trouble, where I think when you hear about candidate quality, I hate that term, but it's because I'm not objective as well.
Sure.
When you hear about candidate quality, I think what people are saying is, hey, do we have a candidate who can be mechanical, and do we have a candidate who can stay on message, right? Mm-hmm. Like you hear that pretty often. And I think we had two candidates who would not do that because it's not who they are.
Yeah.
Because they are real human beings. Trust me on that.
Yeah.
The Scott Jensen you saw on the campaign trail was the Scott Jensen I got to have conversations with. The Matt Burke I saw on the campaign trail, that was the Matt Burke I got to have conversations with. That's part of it. I think that people say they want that, but I think at the end of the day, politics is still a discipline, and politics is still something that you need to be a mechanical robot at some point in time in order to get your message out. We did not have the funding to compete with the DFL and the apparatus on the other side, so we probably had a small window and small finances to convey one, maybe 1.5 core messages, instead of going off on whatever the issue might have been that day. And then the stuff that we didn't control, the other part that we, controlled to a certain extent, I should say, was the financing piece of it, the money. People, this is all consolation to a certain extent, but Scott Jensen, Matt Burke raised more money than any gubernatorial candidate in the history of Minnesota and any statewide Republican candidate in Minnesota, and it wasn't even close. Scott Jensen built a grassroots army. That's why caucus night looked the way it did. That's why we took an intentional campaign strategy at the beginning to work those people through caucus night.
Yep.
That's in part why you saw 55% new people at the state convention this year. That's unheard of. I've been part of the last 5 state conventions. That's unheard of. But when you talk about the apparatus, when you talk about things like Alliance for a Better Minnesota, which I hope we get into later on in the show.
Yeah, for sure.
When you talk about the entire complex nature of what they have going on the left, essentially we were outspent $40-50 million to maybe 9.
Yep.
Maybe 9. So that's a little bit of what we controlled, what we did not control. And then I would just say what we did not control, and this is another kind of half and half, control, not control. I think with the vision that we have now, and given hindsight, there are certainly things I think Scott and I will both talk about that we probably could have done a little bit different or thought about differently. But the Dobbs decision.
Sure.
The Dobbs decision was a real thing. Every internal poll that we had us down 2 to 4 points. 2 to 4 points. Abortion was always the number one issue, but it was the number one issue with 23%, 24%.
Sure.
Okay? Crime, education, inflation, that occupied a majority of the issue base, and we were winning on those issues. According to public polls, according to internal polls, we were winning on the majority of issues that everyone said, these are going to be the issues, this is what's going to overtake abortion. It did not. It did not, and it did not across the country. I think abortion was a much bigger deal than we wanted to admit. I think, Scott, you'll agree with that.
Yeah, do we want to go into it right away and talk about the abortion issue?
Yeah.
I want this to be free will. And, the reason I asked the question, if there's anything you could kind of pin on, is because I think it helps to better kind of take away some of the garbageness that I heard coming from a lot of people. So, when you talk about candidate quality, to me, I also agree that that's garbage, because in Minnesota, especially in Minnesota, we have a pretty robust system that you go through in which a bunch of people all across, whether from caucus to state convention, come out. And so I am a person that believes of the people, and the system works that way. Some people can say, well, I'd rather go straight primary, and we can have a conversation about that. But I just think that the people are the ones that chose who our candidate was, and I think that the people made the right decision, because I think people in general make good decisions. That's my personal belief. And so whenever we talk about candidate quality, I'm like, I think Dr. Jensen, honestly, you're probably one of the most genuine candidates that I've ever met, And I've been involved in politics for 16 years. And then the money thing. And so a little bit's like a pat on the back, because that's what I said, is that you're always going to have issues here and there that are always going to differ. But when even though you're doing this historic raising, all of the other apparatus around you, it's like, where was the MNGOP?
Correct.
Right? Where were these other organizations? Why weren't they putting money? And that is the unfortunate part of it. But yeah, let's
AK, if I could just really quick, just dovetail on just one other thing that was kind of in our control, kind of not, and with the benefit of hindsight, I'm telling you now that we probably had more control over it than I thought, but would have been benefited by either an outside group or the state party getting a little bit more focused on this, is the ballot chasing / ballot harvesting part of it, which happens across the country. In Minnesota, you are allowed to be a representative on a ballot for 3 other people if they are either disabled, if they live in congregative care, or, and this is the vague part, they also list if you cannot make it to the polls on election day.
Sure.
Okay? So I really do believe in this philosophy of what Scott and Matt were trying to do and what we built a campaign around was winning hearts and minds,
Yeah.
That was what this was about. And I think what we're learning is that this is less about winning hearts and minds and winning voters and more about playing a game of getting a low propensity ballot into the ballot box.
Yeah, you have to play that game. So I know, Jai, you said let's get into it, man.
Yeah, let's get into it. I mean, Scott, do you have an opinion on anything that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, I think that there's maybe 3 positives and 3 negatives that jump out right away at me. First off, to piggyback a little bit on what Max indicated, we did set a record in terms of fundraising for a gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side of the ticket at $6 million approximately. That's never been done before. We had some 120,000 people join our email team. That's not been done before on the Republican side of the equation. We had some 40,000 unique donations. Max and his native company was able to take an emerging trend in terms of small dollar donors online and literally throw gasoline on that so that it just flamed for us. And there was one day where I remember Max put out an email asking people to help. And I think literally online giving one day over $150,000. So I think we set the records. We got 8 more counties than I think any other gubernatorial Republican candidate has gotten this century. We have over 85% of the counties we won. We won over 95%, I think, of the geography. If the race had been 86 counties instead of 87 and we'd let Hennepin have its own election, we would have won by 50,000 votes. That's maybe the first positive. The second positive was I think we created a movement of energy. People were more energized and engaged, and perhaps that's why we had so much optimism on Election Day. It proved to be, if you will, faulty optimism, but it was there, and it was because people felt that palpable energy. And the third positive that I would articulate would be, even though Matt Burke and Scott Jensen were perhaps the face of the campaign, I really think that what we were talking about was a moral compass. And I think people resonated with that. And we said over and over again, there's a set of values that we honor. And what are we doing to our kids? And if we don't feel safe, we're not safe. And can we fight back against inflation with sound fiscal policies instead of foolishly connecting Minnesota to the California car mandates, which made things worse? We said that there was a set of values that was being carried by a vessel, and the vessel happened to be Scott Jensen and Matt Burke. But I think the moral compass was there, and I think that was the big deal. So we set the records, we created a movement of energy, and it was centered around a vessel of values. That's the positive. The negative, we got smoked by 190,000 votes. We missed on 3 big issues. First, our polling, both ours as well as others, it was, if you will, erroneous. We thought that because we were winning on the crime issue, the education issue, the inflation issue, that we were going to be okay. We knew we were getting the snot kicked out of us on the abortion issue. And we had not done a good job of articulating the message during the course of the preparation for the endorsement, because that pushes you to the right. Once you get the endorsement, now you got the task of, okay, how do we get ready for the general election in November? But we knew we were going to get the snot kicked out of us on the abortion issue, but we thought that was, like Max said, 23, 25%, somewhere in there. That group of people, we wouldn't get their vote. But we thought that the great majority of people would be voting on the inflation, crime, education issues. We were wrong. So that was a big one. Second thing we failed on was, and this was a systemic thing in terms of the Minnesota GOP party. Iconically, traditionally, we think of get out the vote as being door knocking and phone calls. Excuse my language, bullshit. The Democratic machine understands how to do this.
Yep.
You chase ballots.
Yep.
You understand what the rules of the game are, and then you play. You play within the rules, but you go get those ballots. You go to someone's house and you say, you go to low propensity voters, people that may well not vote, and you say, are you going to vote? No, I don't usually go. Well, we can get you the ballot mailed to you. Here, let's just fill out this form. I'll help you. And so you help me, you throw it in the mail. 10 days later, you go back to that home. You say, did you vote? Well, no, it's over on the desk. I didn't bother. Well, we can do that right now, and I can witness your signature, and I can be your agent, and I can drop it off at the mailbox. Those are the things that I think the Democratic machine has become very good at doing. And the Republican side of the equation, we failed miserably. And then I think the third thing that we probably failed at was we played by the rules of the past. We don't get as much money as the Democrats do. We know that. What does that mean? Well, if you're going to have 1/5 of the amount of money that they have, if they're going to spend $50 million and you're going to spend 10,
they would like to see the party.
If you're going to spend $10 million and they're going to spend $50 million, you might have to spend your money differently. You may have to do it before they brand you. You may have to start out maybe in July rather than waiting for them to take the lead in August and September, and then in October we're responding. We perhaps should have put out our brand, especially with an issue such as abortion. And if abortion wasn't enough of an issue, we have the overlay this time around of the haunting 2020 election, the January 6th event, the upcoming 24 presidential campaign with candidates starting to announce or hint that they're going to announce. All that overlay made it even more difficult. But I think that in terms of getting out the vote, we failed. In terms of paying attention to polls that were erroneous, it hurt us deeply. And thirdly, with the limited amount of money we had, perhaps we should have been leading and spending some of that money first, dabbling there. I think we thought that network television wasn't really that important, but people still do watch network television because they saw those women in green dresses tell the whole world over and over again that I'm dangerous and extreme.
Yeah, so to that point, when we talk about the money, something that I've heard from other people is like, it just didn't feel like, the Jensen campaign was out there spending money. Obviously, you can go and look through the financial disclosures. You can see where all the money is being spent because that's how it works. But for the person that's too lazy to do that, what are some things that the campaign spent money on that just maybe didn't come through in ways that people could visually see it?
I would contend that as a campaign committee, we spent more money on television than any other GOP candidate. I'm kind of flying off the cuff here. We spent $2 million on network and cable television. We spent with a group, a professional group out of DC. We spent that money. We spent significantly on digital. We spent on staff and a field program. I think a lot of the times, people look at this campaign because not a lot of the establishment was really let into this campaign.
Yeah,
I'll tell
true.
you,
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the establishment, they're sitting here Monday morning quarterbacks because they were not ever part of this campaign.
That's right.
It is what it is. Maybe it'll be their turn in 2 years. Maybe they can go and try to do their best.
How does the GOP fix that, right? When you talk about maybe it wasn't their candidate, so they kind of sit on the sidelines, or they do things to make it harder for whoever the candidate is. In this case, it was Scott, right?
Yeah,
So
there are people who, on election night were patting my back saying it's going to be a good night, who are making comments now.
Sure.
That's,
They were hoping that
But they
could
were
catch
rooting.
that coattail, right?
Well, but secretly rooting against us. I mean, there were people going up on the radio saying that Scott Jensen's a really good candidate in March, and then, saying what a trash candidate he was. Now,
that's one thing in public safety for me. We might have a strategy meeting where we might disagree in private, but whatever decision is made by whoever the leader is, that's what we follow and we go through.
Yeah.
I didn't see that with the GOP. I did not see that. I saw people backdooring and doing everything they could to make sure Scott wasn't successful.
Yeah, I think that happens. That it happened. I was I did a lot of the digital work for Jeff Johnson in 2018. This was, I will tell you, in every single way, a different campaign than that was. We went through an endorsement process and a caucus process. Scott Jensen won overwhelmingly on caucus night, won during the endorsement process, which I think surprised a lot of people. And at the end of the day, though, a lot of the people who have been critical of the campaign, and it's fine, it's fine to be critical. We did not win. However, if you are unwilling to pull out the positive, innovative, creative things that were happening on the Scott Jensen for Governor campaign and say everything was farcical or they lost, so we're not going to take any nugget away from that campaign, I don't envy someone who runs in 2 years or 4 years.
Yeah, no. So here's a couple of the things that you said, both you, Scott, and Max. People don't understand that the new norm is getting ballot harvesting under control. Like, as long, like you can hate the entire idea, right? But if you look kind of trickling up until election day, the total number of absentee ballots that were submitted was like something like 749,000, okay? And like a week and a half before the election, it was down at like 280,000, right? So, I mean, they ramped up gigantically, and I can promise you that the vast majority of those were not Republican. And that's true, that we have to understand that this is the game that we have to play if we want to be able to win, is that we can't be like, oh, well, since we want to show up on election day, like, show up on election day, cool. Like, you're the high propensity voter that will do anything. But the DFL and the Democrats all across this country are getting the people that would not take the time to actually go out and vote. They're getting their votes because they're knocking on the door 6 times saying, hey, I can grab your ballot for you.
Correct. Well, we had a question earlier from Ashley, who asked on one of our social media pages about how do you get the confidence back with election fraud when it comes to that. And what's your answer? How do we get that confidence back in our system?
I think we need to go with what Europe is doing in terms of having photo ID. But we're not going to be able to do that until we win.
Yep.
So our losing streak of 30 statewide races in a row makes that sort of a bleak likelihood at this point in time. But I would say that if 46 out of 47 countries in Europe are doing it, I don't think they're all wrong. I think that whether or not you like all the things that go along with our election process or not, it's safe to say that when Steve Simon, the Secretary of State, testified in committee hearings before the legislature in the past couple of years, that virtually every election has some level of shenanigans going on. The question is, what threshold does it get to? I mean, if you are allowed to be an agent for 3 people in terms of helping them vote, and you do it for 5 people, that's going to be very difficult to track. If you're going to, if you will, participate in violations of the law in terms of mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, vouching for people that shouldn't be vouched for. If you're going to do those things, you can eliminate almost all that just with having photo ID. But we're not there.
Yep.
So that means we've got to stop, and we can complain and vent. That's part of the process of being a human. But at some point in time, we've got to roll up our sleeves and we've got to say, okay, we've got to go win. And I think that we didn't win. We thought that Minnesota was ready for a, if you will, a radically transparent campaign, a radically authentic campaign. Matt Burke might not be the most polished politician, and for sure Scott Jensen is not. But both of us are very authentic. We just speak our heart. And we thought that this was going to be a race about hearts and minds, not about just same old, same old. And so I think that what happened is we thought that transparency, authenticity, a willingness to speak for all people, and I mean all people. There were people who wanted us to talk about big, bold ideas on personal income tax. There were people that wanted us to talk about mining in the northern part of the state. There were people who wanted us to talk about how do you keep the family farm in the southern and western part of the state. We took on all of those. We trailblazed the issues. We got vilified for doing that. We ran against Tim Walz, and I'm not going to denigrate Tim Walz, but because his strategy was very effective and it worked. But he and his team decided to duck things. They weren't going to debate any more than they had to. It was a little bit Joe Biden-ish. It was sort of
that's a whole Democrat strategy all across the country. Katie Hobbs did the same thing.
Hunker down in the basement, say as little as possible, let the machine do the work, let the money do the work, and it worked.
Yeah, so when I hear people talk about cheating and all that different stuff, I'm like, I get you. I myself, working in campaign politics, being at the University of Minnesota, going around and actually, trying to get people registered to vote and seeing all like the 1 to 20 canvassers, right? I understand that's all a thing, but if we just sit here and say like, oh, because fraud happens or whatever, what you're actually doing is you're disenfranchising Republican voters that say, it's not even worth our time. So to me, it's like we have to be able to say, let's play the game. I'm not saying do anything illegal, because I think that as like you said, we are doing the moral compass thing, right? We're not going to go and cheat, but let's work within the confines that exist, and we have to be able to overthink. So here's my thing. I know that someone might say, well, no, it was the abortion issue that really killed you. Yeah, I know abortion killed us.
Yes.
But that was a thing that was going to happen no matter what. And this is what I've tried to explain. And John and I actually had a disagreement about this. He said, well, if you had a pro-choice governor candidate, they might have won. And it's like, no, because the machine and the apparatus would just switch to a different issue. And that's the thing, is that my thing is that we have to be able to have greater impact on the culture. We have to be able to understand that the way that the system works now, it's all about getting low propensity voters to vote because the Democrats are really good at it. And the thing that matters to me about candidate quality is that we have to have a robust system. Otherwise, yes, we'll get some establishment shill in that doesn't care about anything. And even if they ended up doing good, if you don't change the actual apparatus, you're still not going to ever be able to succeed. So I guess to you, Dr. Jensen, is there anything that you would have explicitly wished that you would have done different about your messaging when it comes to abortion that you think ultimately changed the outcome of this election? I think the answer is no, but I'm curious what you think.
I think that we need to understand that we can be pro-life and pro-health freedom. And pro-health freedom means that we respect the autonomy of everybody as much as is possible. And pro-life to me means let's come alongside of women and really support women. Let's make sure that birth control pills are over the counter like they are in more than half the nations in the world. Let's put a maximum price of $10 per month on them. Let's have paid maternity leave. If a woman decides to go through with a pregnancy and provide the child for adoption, let's have greased wheels in terms of adoption agencies being able to step in and do that, as well as an adoption tax credit. Let's stiffen the penalties for crimes that target women, such as rape. Let's really share the responsibility and the challenge of planning pregnancies and planning families. If we do that, we can hearken back to the days of Bill Clinton when he talked about let's make abortion safe, legal, and rare. It used to be 20,000 per year in Minnesota, and it's down to 10,000. Let's not try to get to zero tomorrow. Let's try to get down to 5,000. Let's get down to 3,000. Let's make an unexpected, unplanned pregnancy less of a consideration by doing all the things that we can do. Let's have a morning after pill in the medicine cabinet of every sexually active man and woman, so that if a condom breaks or an unanticipated sexual encounter occurs, that it doesn't turn someone's life upside down. Let's not let the question of abortion be the determinant of sexual mores in our society, because that's way beyond the pale. These are the things that we need to do. And I don't think we did a good job of messaging it. I think that we saw a hint of what we were up against in Kansas in August when a pro-life, a conservative state had the chance to ban abortion, and it went 60-40 against the ban. The only way those numbers could crank in that way were for pro-life people to vote pro-choice, and they did. And it was because Roe v. Wade in place for half a century. It really was less of a conversation and more just sort of drawing lines in the sand and bickering and screaming and hollering and venting and all that. But once the Supreme Court overturned that, now it was a real conversation. And I think that I did a lousy job of really doing the soul searching I needed to do and then articulating carefully, because I think I can be pro-life and also very much pro-health freedom for everybody, meaning that people get to maximize their autonomy. If we end up as a society saying that after 15 weeks of pregnancy, abortion is allowed only for endangered mothers' physical or mental health or rape or incest, but prior to 15 weeks, there's no legislation in place, that may well be where we end up. Many countries in Europe have done that. Several states have done that. I think women that voted against Jensen and Burke weren't necessarily voting against us because they were for abortion. I think it was symbolic that they were for bodily autonomy. And in the same way that I want health freedom when it comes for me to decide whether or not I want a COVID vaccine, they wanted that same autonomy in terms of determining what went on with their body for at least the first 15 weeks.
So how do we move forward with that as far as our candidates go? When you have the Minnesota GOP cornering you, in a sense, when you have to play, like you said, far right to get an endorsement, and then when you get into a general, you're already beat up. What happens there? How do we change that so candidates, and Max, you can talk to this as well, what do we need to do so our candidates are not beat up when it comes to the general? And a question, Scott, I get a lot is, you had to go far right before the endorsement, and then you went more towards the middle during the general. Where do you align? Which one is that more you as a person after the election and not having people say you need to do this or that? Where do you align on that?
That's a straight right in my face question. Thanks for asking, John. I've done a lot of soul searching. I mean, I even had conversations today with patients, and I think that I can be a pro-life doctor who's delivered 500 babies and fought tooth and nail to make sure that a 23-week preemie has a chance to have a normal life, and I can still respect the bodily autonomy that the pro-choice movement wants. I think that if we land at 15 weeks and up until then it's not a legislated matter, it's a private health decision, and after that it's a situation where a mother's physical or mental health is endangered or rape or incest, I think that's a reasonable place to end up. If you look at two metrics, I think they're really important. For me as a citizen of the United States, I see our democracy founded on the notion that the majority gets to rule, but the minority gets to have a seat at the table.
Yeah,
if you're going to say that, then I think there's two key metrics that have to be looked at. More than 2/3 of Minnesotans believe that third trimester abortions should not be done casually or electively.
Right.
But also, more than 2/3 of Minnesotans do not believe abortion should be banned. So somewhere in between those two metrics, there will be a common ground. And it may well be that people aren't entirely satisfied or happy with that. The pro-life group, which I'm a member of, may not be happy with that. But if we say, listen, we're going to work our tail off to make sure that the consideration of terminating a pregnancy is going to come up a lot less often because we're going to make available accessible, affordable birth control pills without having to go through a $400 physical exam every year in order to do that. And we're going to provide a morning after pill availability virtually everywhere. I think that's where we want to do. We want to take that 10,000 abortions down to 2,000 abortions or less. And I think both pro-life and pro-choice sides could agree on that.
Yeah, Max.
Max, I want to know your thoughts, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a hardcore pro-lifer, okay?
Yeah, me too.
And I understand everything that you're saying, Dr. Jensen. I kind of disagree with you on certain aspects in regards to, like, I think ultimately that there's a difference between winning the argument and understanding what the reality is and trying to kind of have this we have to have this definitive stance. It's all about messaging. Like your values and your beliefs to me is
it's not all about messaging here, AK. This is about pure, honest disagreement between people, many of whose position on abortion will be determined by their spiritual faith.
I think everybody
I
at
agree.
this table is pro-life, right? Everybody at this table is. But I want to know, how do we address this issue so we can start winning races?
Yeah. So Max, what do you think, man?
Yeah. I think those things are actually somewhat at odds with one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
A political party, electoral success, that does not determine my faith or my personal beliefs, right? I think you and I are equally yoked as far as abortion goes. I think it is a moral evil. I think it is unacceptable. I'm pretty extreme, okay? And I've told Scott this. I'm a pretty extreme pro-life guy.
Yeah.
But I also need to recognize that it is absolutely out of step with who our voters are in Minnesota. What Scott said is not inaccurate.
Right.
All right? 2/3 of Minnesotans believe that. They might even consider themselves to be pro-life. In fact, I think our internal polling, I think most polling where you have abortion be at 24-25%, I would actually contend, based on these results in Minnesota and based on results across the country, that some people did not answer that question honestly because abortion is such a taboo topic. It's very easy to say crime is my number one issue. I don't want to be mugged. I don't want to get carjacked. It's a little bit harder to say my right to choose an abortion is my number one topic. And I will tell you, after the endorsement, after the field kind of cleared, one of the biggest advocates to come to our campaign and actually come alongside of our campaign, not in an antagonistic way, but in, please, like, I want you to win, help me, was Michelle Tafoya.
Yeah.
Michelle Tafoya came alongside our campaign and she said, I am talking to my friends, I am talking to suburban women, I am talking to all sorts of, a cross-section of people that we needed to win. And she said, and I'll never forget this, she said, you will lose on this issue. You will lose, despite everything, despite crime, despite inflation, despite economy, you will lose on this issue, because even if women did not want to get an abortion, even if they thought it was an impalatable thing, what Scott said before is we had 40 years of precedent about what they thought their right was. So they may not have gotten an abortion, know someone who got an abortion, but to have something taken from them, and that was the perception of the issue.
That was, yeah,
have
100%.
something taken from them was devastating. And they wanted to make sure, and keep in mind, this is where finances come into play. The DFL, Tim Walz, Alliance for a Better Minnesota, the entire left apparatus put $40 to $50 or more million into one issue.
Yep.
One. We put maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe 9 into
All the
three,
issues.
3,
yeah,
Yeah.
3.5, 4 issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
They put it all into one issue. And then towards the end, they said they used a Scott Jensen ad. Public education is a black hole. That was the garnish on top of it.
Sure.
But they took a gambit. They took a risk. They played roulette on one issue. And for us to say, hey, it's messaging, it's this, it's that, I will just say, if I could have one, like, maybe time period back, that, again, with the benefit of hindsight, we could have done maybe a little bit differently, was when the Dobbs decision got leaked, right? When that opinion got leaked, that's when we should have been burning Doe versus Gomez and a constitutional Minnesota protection into people's brains. And we didn't, because, again, it seemed like other issues were bubbling to the surface and would have eclipsed that issue. We did a focus group where a lot of these suburban Edina moms said, hey, we want a right to an abortion, but this crime thing eclipses that. And I don't think it did.
Yeah.
I really don't think it did.
I do think one thing that needs to be considered is that I think it's important for all of us, and I think Americans recognize this, that there's a legitimate disagreement on abortion, where exactly you come down on the issue. But I think we've turned it into this purity test. And I think that's really problematic. And so I think there's value for America to, if you will, find a place, wherever that is, that on a statewide level does have some similarity to the Roe v. Wade, which provided a measure of, okay, here's where we're at. So that we can then, both sides, pro-life and pro-choice, they can advocate for their position. And what the pro-life position would be then would be, okay, let's make sure that we do everything to get out family planning, birth control pills available, over-the-counter, cheap, inexpensive, affordable, morning after pill available, all of that stuff. Because there's value for America as a nation for us to be able to find peace in the kingdom on this issue so that we can deal with inflation and crime and education. Because right now, some of these critical issues are really problematic. And if I could just pivot the conversation a titch, I would say the other thing that hurt us was that if the election had happened a year earlier, obviously Roe v. Wade wouldn't have been overturned. But the other thing is people's memories would have been fresher in terms of the lockdowns, the locking out of the kids, the locking in of the nursing homes, the expansion of government into every aspect of our lives. I think the riots in 2020, all of those memories had faded a little bit. And with the fading of memory, people look at the here and now, and the here and now was really a jazzed up, ginned up conversation across the nation about abortion. It dominated this election cycle.
And to Jai's point too, Jai, I had forgotten you'd asked about this, but it's like, hey, what does the party need to do, or what do activists need to do? And I've been an activist since 2008 here in Minnesota, from college Republicans there on in. And I think where I land is, even though I have strong convictions, and AK, you and I both have strong convictions about what this means, to acknowledge what our constituency is here in Minnesota, to acknowledge the reality of the situation, and to give grace to our potential candidates. I think we really do need to be concerned about the electability, the issues that actually matter to people. And I think, talking to Scott, it's like 1.1 something million people voted for you. 1.3 something million people voted for Tim Walz. I don't think we grasp the sheer volume of humanity that votes, even though it's a percentage of total population. Think about that. 1.1 million people, 1.116 or whatever million people voted for Scott Jensen. There are people we've never interacted with. They've never seen our message. They've never seen a TV ad. They've never seen a digital ad, no matter how much money we spend. But what they are voting on are stories that they hear from maybe neighbors, etc., and vice versa, right? 1.3 million voters on the other side. It's really not about being right on an issue.
Yeah.
As sad as that might sound, because I would argue also that Dr. Scott Jensen has been vindicated, and I'll say it right here, has been vindicated on COVID issues across the board.
Right.
And I want to know, did that vindication win him Edina? Did that vindication win him Maple Grove? Did that vindication win him Plymouth, Minnesota? It doesn't matter, because it made him unappealing to people.
Yeah.
Are we interested in winning, or are we interested in being right? And AK, I'm not sure that those two things are the same thing.
Yeah, so the thing that I think is important to always frame is make sure we're using the same terminology. So my biggest issue, and I agree with you, that you can't sacrifice your values for power. I think that is a foolish goal. You will lose. People will see your inauthenticity. One of the reasons that when I first met you, if you remember way back, I had you on another podcast, and I said I want to interview every candidate. Only one I didn't do was Mike Murphy, and I got to talk to Mike after, but I didn't do an interview with him. And the reason that I was like, I'm on board with you, is because I'm like, this is one of the most authentic dudes. But I do agree that you have to be able to have a conversation with people where they're at, not where you're at. You want to try and eventually get them to you, but you have to have a conversation with them where they're at. And so when I say messaging, I'm saying that we have to understand, here's our core values, but there are things that are more important to other people. And if you shut them off, right? People have these intuitions. Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist, talks about basically the moral foundations theory, and that intuition is what guides all of us as humans, especially when it comes to morality. And if I say something that intuitively makes you sick to your stomach or feel dread or anger, everything else that I am saying, you shut down. So we have to have conversations with people where they're at without having to sacrifice our ideals, for sure. But I think that that's just another aspect that I think that what you're saying, Dr. Jensen, is that you realize that you need to have conversations with people where they're at. And the way that we do that is by saying, what is it that your issue is? And it's not that you're an evil person necessarily. I think the act is evil, but you're not an evil person. So what's the issue? And I think that's the way that we do things. I wish that could happen more.
It's listening. And the Star Tribune talked about it the other day, right? They had a cartoon with your quote. And talk about that for a minute, about what you said to them. And it's to AK's point about meeting them where they're at, but also listening.
Actually, I think in the late 1980s, Steve Covey wrote a book called 7 Habits of Effective People. And one of those was seek first to understand, then be understood. And I remember reading that in the 1980s. That's 35 years ago. I remember really coming away with a thought that's so spot on. And it gets to what you were saying, AK, because if you seek first to understand, then you're not saying or doing something to someone that is going to evoke a visceral adverse response. They're going to continue to interface with you in a legitimate way. And so you have a chance. And so the other day I said, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, we need to step back. And when we encounter someone who has a different view than we do, instead of pummeling them with our perspective, we need to step back and say, hey, I need some help. I can't get my arms around where you're at. Help me understand why you see this issue the way you do, because that's not where I'm at. If we do that, we at least have a chance. A case in point might be, and this would be a mea culpa. This is something I did wrong. I think I was probably too slow during the campaign to occasionally just say it. Mea culpa, my bad, sorry about that, should have chosen a different word. I think there was a part of me that was too proud, where I remember I used the word black hole in terms of education. Well, in the people that I talk with about home ownership, it's not uncommon for us to refer to our homes as a black hole, regardless of whether or not we put in a new countertop or bought a new appliance 2 years ago. It seems like next year we have to budget for that as well. You know, we put in new carpet, but it was outdoor carpet and it didn't wear well when we're putting it in. It seems like when you own a home, it represents a black hole. And I looked up over and over again, what does black hole look? I looked it up in the slang dictionary, in Webster's dictionary, in the Google dictionary, and it basically says that where you're putting money or effort into something and you don't see a tangible, lasting effect. So when I made the comment about throwing more money at public education wasn't going to be the answer to get us a reduced achievement gap, to get a better education, to reduce the rate of illiteracy, but I said black hole, and that just became this.
Yeah, they
hot
twisted
button.
it. They twisted it.
I should have just come and said, "Hey, folks, come on. There's so many big issues. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to irritate anybody when I said that. I'm just talking about that. It's a money pit. You can just keep putting money in it. It doesn't necessarily get what you want." That conversation never took place. And like Max said, the coup de grace for the DFL campaign against me at the very end was after they'd slaughtered me with $20 million worth of ads saying I'm extreme and dangerous, which I've never been referred to in my life prior to politics. They said, and Jensen says that education's a black hole. And gee, that just has nasty connotation. Who would want to vote for someone who thinks education's a black hole? So I think when it comes to the messaging in that, I think that if I had a chance to do it over again, I think I'd be a little bit more easygoing about when someone confronts me and say, hey, My bad. I didn't mean to offend you. I should have chosen a different word. I should have done a different metaphor. It's just this gotcha game that we're playing. And I remember reading an article about Judy Dutcher, I think in 2006.
I remember.
There was a comment about the E85 and blended fuels. And she actually understood blended fuels reasonably well. But she at first didn't hear the question. Then she sort of stumbled and she was thinking about something else. And this article is in the Strib many years ago, and I just read it the other day. But it's this gotcha game. And what it really does is it demeans our political process. I would think that Minnesotans want that transparent, open, authentic conversation. But instead, they're saying, no, it's okay to hide in the basement. And if you do use the wrong words, so help me, we're going to come after you like stink on manure.
We'll talk about that a little bit on the personal side of that. I'm not talking about the political side, but the personal side of the gotcha game. Because I know that's frustrating. I know I said words when I was running for my race that made people mad. But for you, I mean, the personal side of it, I remember getting home and being like, this is bullshit. This is not what I meant. And they're going after it or saying something and twisting my words. I was made out to be a racist. I was made out to be anti-immigration, things like that, where it's nonsense. Talk about the personal toll that took on you.
Well, in a word, it's vexing beyond words. It's just vexing. And you're absolutely right, Jai. You'd come home and you say, I didn't mean that. I remember where I talked about incremental encroachment on the rights we're accustomed to having. And I made a comparison to a time frame in history. And grant you, it wasn't elegant, evidently. But I made that simply because I think these things sometimes creep in. And sometimes we don't see the fruit of what's going on until it feels like it's too late. That's what I was trying to do. And I think Max pointed out to me a few weeks ago, he said, Scott, there were 3 consecutive front page articles on you, just eviscerating you for basically making a statement that could legitimately be argued in the halls of academia.
Correct.
But the fact is, I took a beating. How do you quantify how much money that's worth for the DFL team to have 3 adverse, hostile, demeaning front page articles about Scott Jensen, about something
in 1 week
that really wasn't meant in any kind of a denigrating manner, and yet that's what happened. Is that worth $2 billion, $8 million, $10 million? I'll never know.
Well, how do you fight the media bias, right? When they go after,
Jai, I think you take someone like me, maybe a little naive, maybe authenticity is too strong a value for me, and maybe I just can't run from it. So I'm going to be that. And somehow you get a guy like Max as a general consultant to work with me and help me stay within some guardrails that are safer, to be very, very calculated in terms of introducing anything new to a conversation. I mean, without question, I think I got better as we went along, but sometimes the damage is done. And so I don't know. I would tell someone if they were going to run and do something like we did, I would say you're going to hear this over and over again, that you've got to really be disciplined. They're not telling you that because they want to crimp your style. They're telling you that because they've lived through this before. Don't be headstrong. I probably was a little bit more rambunctious than I needed to be, and that's on me. I was not a professional politician, still am not. Could have done better, but if I were to do it again, I think I'd be a little bit more easygoing and say, hey, folks, forgive me. I didn't mean anything by that. I was simply trying to draw a comparison, or that was the word that came to my brain. But I think in the long run, Jai, where I'm at is I know that my wife and I and Max and our team and Matt Burke and his wife, we worked our tail off and we put it all on the table. I mean, virtually every day, 6 a.m. to 10 at night. And I was still trying to take care of my full panel of patients in that. So I don't have any regrets, but there are things about the political system that sometimes make me want to vomit.
So I want to give a shout out to one of the things that I found that was probably The most inspiring were all of the mama bears that were part of that grassroots that came out that full of force, full effect. You know, we had Melissa Schultz from Minnesotans for Health and Parental Rights, and there's like this whole awesome group of women, mothers, and then I know there's fathers as well that are in these groups too. But to me, like that was an aspect that is going to lead to a question that I have for you, Max. Okay, so there's all these great things like, yeah, we gotta really get in the ballot harvesting game. You know, we gotta find the best way to talk to people. This blah blah blah. But there's a reality that exists that Minnesota, when it comes to being right of center, we have almost zero cultural power. And so my question to you is, how do we start to change that? Now, yeah, I got a TikTok, got 100,000 followers, but I don't have 1 million followers. And I try to make content that is all kind of wide ranging. I throw in petty jokes, things like that. But it feels like we have to really try and actually have an influence on the cultural apparatus that exists. How do we start doing that? Because if we don't, then yes, we can do all these other things perfect, but you're going to have free advertising and media coming from all of the cultural institutions because there's no one there that has our side. There's not friends that are at K-Fan that are like, oh no, this dude's really awesome. They all shut down, right? So how, if any, do we have an influence there, man?
Yeah, that's. I think that's wandering in the wilderness for a little while, to be quite honest, because I think the culture part of it is going to be self-fulfilling. I think nothing is going to get better in 2 years. I think everything's going to get worse. I think Democrats will not have an answer to anything. I think the reality that they're forcing us to accept will become more and more absurd. And I thought, honestly, AK, I thought this was the cycle by which people would throw that off and say, wow, holy shit, everything is terrible right now and getting worse. We just spent 2 years, my kids got locked out of school. The education results are speaking for themselves. Yep. My kid can't read. They're trying to get us back as the teachers strike in Minneapolis to go to distance learning, and that's happening right now. We have another nurse strike that's happening because they are so burned out by their healthcare profession. I thought that this would be the flagship moment, and it wasn't. But it's still coming because they're not going to learn a single lesson from this election. Tim Walz may want to try to moderate right now, but how they're treating it in Minnesota, I think how the legislature, the House and Senate, which belong to the DFL, the Democrats right now, they're going to treat this as a referendum on progressivism.
So would you encourage that people, just whatever space that you operate in, do you think it's important that people get out there and they talk about on their social media, even if it's not eloquent, even just being able to get their voices and opinions out there? Because to me, that's the culture, right?
Yeah.
Like people not being afraid. You don't have to be adversarial, but just being like, if you're fed up, if you think that it's bullshit that your kids are suffering, then get out and say it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if it's
social media anymore.
Sure.
I believe that, and I'm in social media. I'm in digital. You know, so I'm not doing the best job at advertising my services. You better call a friend. You better go to church. I'm serious. You better be talking to neighbors right now. I'm shocked in North Branch, Minnesota, where my wife and I moved at the end of 2020. I got 2 neighbors who live across the road from me. They're both relatively conservative people. I've talked to both of them. Neither one of them voted for Trump either time. But get this. They love Trump.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
What is that psyche?
Yeah.
You love the guy, but you haven't voted in either one of his elections.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
As soon as we unlock what the 1.1 or the 1.3 million people are actually doing, because we're all, to a certain extent, Jai, you're probably newest to this, but we're all nerds, man. We are all geeks about politics. We think way too much about this stuff. We're not as critically engaged with what the normal person considers on a day-to-day basis. And that's why the abortion issue I find so fascinating, because I think it permeated the mind of people who are not involved in politics.
Yeah.
But let me jump in there. I think that I'm an optimist, and sometimes I'm a naive optimist. But I think that there's an awful lot of people who recognized the importance of those words of Edmund Burke when he said, "The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing." I think there were a ton of people engaged. Some of them may not have voted for a variety of reasons, but they are paying attention. I think 2022 is going to go down in the history books as the year an election was literally turned on its head because the Supreme Court decided to overturn a questionable piece of jurisprudence from 50 years earlier. But let's not take away anything from the millions and millions and millions of people across Minnesota and across our nation that paid attention. And again, they were talking. Enough? Perhaps never enough. Are we in the wilderness? Perhaps we're in the wilderness. But I think America is waking up, that we're not occupying that place of being the leaders of freedom that we've been before, that we can do better, that there is something crumbling in our society that we can't let happen without our rising up and saying, enough. Mm-hmm. It may be what we're doing to our kids. It may be doing what we're doing to our work ethic. It may be that we're having policymakers put in inflationary policies that serve the policymakers' pocketbook, but it isn't helping middle America. There's all kinds of these things going on. But I am absolutely convinced that through Max's company and his work as a digital messenger, he did bring people off the sidelines. They got in the arena. Yeah. They bled real. They had slings and arrows. Their families, neighborhoods, churches, businesses, and schools were broken apart. They suffered fracture just like we did in our campaign. So let's make no mistake about it. I think America is on the rise.
So that's why I wonder with what you're saying, AK, about getting out there, being active on social media, talking to your neighbors, going in church. You lose a lot by opening up. And I think people, I understand why people don't do it. I really do, and I don't blame them for not doing it. But I look at the Minnesota GOP. How do we get the Minnesota GOP to be more active when it's getting out the vote initiatives?
Right off the bat, we have got to stop being so traditional. The Democratic Party has been far more willing to trailblaze the frontier. They learned a while ago, get out the vote doesn't mean that you boast about how many phone calls you made or how many pairs of shoes you wore out door knocking. It means chase the ballot. Yeah. Make those people happen. Greater Minnesota did great for us. We won more than 85% of the counties. But could we have done even better in Greater Minnesota? Absolutely we could. How many votes were left on the table? Right. At least 25 to 50,000 ballots that had been mailed out weren't mailed back in Greater Minnesota. And arguably 2/3, 3/4 of those ballots would have been ours. That could have gotten Ryan Wilson or Jim Schultz over the goal line if it would have. We can do better, but without question, the Republican Party has got to recognize the old adage, and it is this: if you can't beat them, join them. Yeah. And frankly, you join them within the confines of the law and you learn how to do it. Go buy a bunch of Democrats dinner and beer every month for a few months so that they can teach us how do you do this so effectively. Hats off to Ken Martin, the head of the DFL. They've done a hell of a job.
Yeah, and to that end, right? I mean, the resource part of it is always part of it. Like just to be very, very clear, when you have a track record of winning, this is a chicken or the egg thing. When you have a track record of winning, that attracts more confident money. When you have more confident money, that allows you to build out an apparatus where you can thereby, at some points, hire people to go out and chase these ballots to make sure that people are turning their stuff in, or in some cases, if you are a legal agent. And my opinion is they treat, on their side, they treat that like a speeding ticket. You know, they don't consider more than 3 people to be a big deal. My 2 cents, don't have proof. You know, not saying that I have any proof of widespread voter fraud. Don't take my words out of context. But I do think that's the way they think about it on their side. If I had the ability with the foresight that I have now to say, should we spend $2 million on TV? Should we spend $1 million on digital? Should we spend $500,000 on radio? Versus, should we spend $4 million or $3.5 million on hiring a team to go out and ballot chase?
Yeah.
we would have gotten an immense amount of shit for it because we would not have been on TV. You still would have heard the abortion ads. I'm not sure that it matters. I'm not sure that this is a game of winning hearts and minds. Not to be cynical, but to have a strategy that can actually win. It's about going to get your lowest propensity people in greater Minnesota or in the metro even to get your effing ballot in. To get your ballot in. If you are like with us 51% of the time, I need you to vote against Tim Walz. And damn it all, I'll help you. I will help be your agent to turn in your ballot if you don't feel like you can make it on election day. That is a reality on their side. It's not a reality on our side. And these laws, by the way, the things that are in place in Minnesota, people complain a lot about, well, COVID permanently changed the way that we vote. There was a lot of executive fiat because of COVID that allows these things to happen. That may be true in Pennsylvania. That may be true in Nevada. It is not true in Minnesota.
Right.
These are statutory things that have been established for 3 to 4 cycles. And we haven't learned. We have not learned the game. We were not even playing the game this cycle.
I just want to throw out that one of our watchers commented that Minnesota's voter turnout was 61%. Okay, so I think this is the thing to understand is that because there's clearly a bunch of votes that were left on the table, using this strategy and changing and shifting our mindset is what we have to do. I agree that it's not necessarily just about winning hearts and minds because the reality is that doesn't just work. If you just want to win hearts and minds, you're still going to lose if the other side is chasing ballots and ballot harvesting legally. So we could do both, but understand that here's where I honestly think is that our message, resonates with average Minnesotans better. Our message. But if someone is chasing ballots and you go to Minneapolis, let's kind of move the conversation over here too. You go to Minneapolis, right, and you knock an apartment complex that has 400 people, and then you go out to Woodbury. How long does it take you to get to 400 doors in Woodbury versus 400 doors in Minneapolis or St. Paul? And this is what we're working against. So if we had an apparatus that was doing the same in Minneapolis and St. Paul, at least we would get that many more votes.
Let's put that in context, AK. In 2014, first off, let's just do some math. In Minnesota, roughly, we have 4 million eligible voters in Minnesota. Typically, in a presidential election, we will get somewhere between 75 and 80% of the voter turnout, and that leads the nation usually. So let's just say it's 80%. 80% of 4 million is 3.2 million. That's in a presidential year, 3.2 million. And that is approximately how many people have voted in Minnesota in 2016 and 2020. But when you go to the off year, the governor's race, if you go to 2014, that was Jeff Johnson against Mark Dayton. There you typically we used to have approximately 50, maybe 55% of the voter turnout. So 2 million out of the 4 million votes would come in, 2 million in 2014. That's why in 2018, the Jeff Johnson team felt that if they could get 1 million votes plus, they would win the election. They got 1.1 million, and they got smoked 54 to 42% because the Walz campaign got 1.4 million. So it was 2018 where we saw the jump go from maybe around 2 million in the off year. In 2014, it jumped to 2.4 million, 2.5 million in the 2000, even 2.6 million actually when you consider the third party votes. And then this time around, it was 2.5 million. So again, we were about 60%. So 60% now, 60% in 2018. In 2014, probably closer to 50 to 55. The increase has really been the Democrats. They have really gotten their machine. It's a lean, mean machine that knows how to do what it's doing. And I think we've been slow in catching up. But it isn't as if this has been going on for 20 years. It's been the last 8-10 years. The Democrats have really figured it out. And the Republicans have absolutely got to say, we got to do this differently. Otherwise, we don't have a chance in hell.
Yeah, so a couple other comments that I want to call out. Thank you, everyone that's been commenting. It's been awesome seeing all the comments pouring in. Want to throw a shout out to Tom Berg, been very active in the chat. Angela Castrovenici, you've been super active. We even got a hater named Jeff, even though you're trolling. That is hilarious. Also, Michelle Justin, you've been very active. Now, a couple of people have said Jensen 2026 ? And people saying they love Jensen. Obviously, we're a ways out, but are you at least leaving it on the table?
Yes, I think that 3 weeks ago we had to start that grieving cycle of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But after 3 weeks, I think that Minnesotans, our greatest resource is our people. People are paying attention. I think it would be foolish for me, a young 68-year-old, to say that I know what the future is going to hold. Yeah. So, the future remains to be seen. But my prayer and my hope and my motivation for Minnesotans, both Democrats, Republicans, as well as independents, is we are a powerful state. We can lead in so many ways, economically, education-wise, safety-wise. We can lead working with minority communities, working together. I know we can do these things. My future isn't nearly as important as Minnesota's future.
If you guys have a couple more minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the minority communities. And I think some issues that people don't really understand happen during this cycle. When it comes to the gatekeepers of certain areas, North Minneapolis. I went to North Minneapolis and people align with conservative views more and more. However, speak on that a little bit about the challenges that you had. We had Laverne Turner comment earlier on one of the social media posts saying he would have liked to see the governor candidate, yourself, and the Minnesota GOP spend more time in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. I tend to disagree with that because weekend before the election, you were in Minneapolis, and I haven't seen a Republican candidate for governor do that in a long, long time. So tell me your views on that and the challenges that you faced, and how much time did you spend in Hennepin County?
Thanks, Jai. I remember one day going down to Lake Street, and my wife and I just walking, going from storefront to storefront, buying pizza, buying a Pepsi, and just talking to people. I remember another day where I was down there alone, and I just walked and I talked to homeless people. I talked to people, where do you get your health care? Do you have health insurance? If you start coughing bloody green sputum up, where do you go? And I remember being told by a couple of people, well, I just wait till I collapse and then an ambulance will pick me up. I think the last weekend before the election, I went to church in the North Loop on Sunday morning. Then I went to church in North Minneapolis and went to a predominantly black church. I was in North Minneapolis or South Minneapolis probably every week for literally a year. I honestly think that what I didn't do a good enough job on was I should have led the conversation more on marijuana. Because I heard from people that our marijuana laws have been discriminatory in an adverse way against minority communities. We should have been talking more about how does the marijuana, getting caught with a joint in your pocket, if you're black and you're a 20-year-old kid with a joint in your pocket and you're caught, you have a greater chance of having the force of the law come down on you. But if you're white, you have a much greater chance that you're not going to have any particular problem. This is wrong. It's unfair. We have to fix it. We need to talk about decriminalizing marijuana problems. We need to talk about expunging records. We need to have the conversation. What does what we're doing with marijuana do right now to our society? Are we allowing our street drugs to potentially be laced with fentanyl? And is that part of the reason we're having so many young people die? I didn't lead that conversation. I think in part I felt constrained because that wasn't part of the message. I was supposed to stick to inflation, crime, and education. So I was probably managed at some level. And I just think that in the minority communities, we need to first show them that we care. And you're not caring if all you're doing is visiting. You're caring if you're talking about the issues that matter to them. And I think we could have done better there. But in terms of physical presence, I would probably disagree with Mr. Turner that I don't think that I could have doubled the amount of times I visited here, and I don't think it would have made any inroads. I think I needed to somehow demonstrate in a more real fashion that I did care about the issues that they care about.
Max, can you talk a little bit about, you were saying offline here that you guys are trying to hold an event in North Minneapolis.
Multiple.
Multiple
that's I mean, Scott's generally right. I'm not sure that. And Laverne and I were on the radio together the day after the election. I'm like, you're not going to find a governor candidate on the GOP side who spent more time in Minneapolis and North Minneapolis than Dr. Scott Jensen, and for that matter, the Lieutenant Governor candidate Matt Burke. I mean, there was a lot of initiatives that were started because of conversations and people that they talked to in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, and communities affected by crime. That was a real thing, a real initiative that we spent real money on and real resources on. We spent probably $75,000 to $80,000 on Hispanic television as well. We were getting very targeted in minority communities, both on a brand awareness side and a community engagement side. And Scott's been doing Scott campaigned for 2 years, almost 2 years, and spent the entirety of that campaign, at least, if you average it out, probably more than once or twice a month, in that relative community. What I will say is we did have multiple events where I distinctly remember one, we were going to have a sports event in North Minneapolis with Ennis Cantor Freedom, a basketball camp event. We got denied in multiple locations, and then eventually the host backed out of that event. That felt like there was external pressure, political pressure happening in that circumstance. I can recall another event where we're going to have with multiple faith leaders in North Minneapolis, an event at a church in North Minneapolis. That event got canceled. It got canceled at 2 other venues. And then we eventually had to go just to the MNGOP North Minneapolis office to have the very event that we wanted to have with faith leaders in the cities. Okay, so I'm not making excuses, and again, I think Scott's right. I'm not sure that anything would have made a difference. When you look at the numbers, Scott Jensen and Matt Burke lost Minneapolis 180,000 to 18,000, a factor of 10 to 1. We lost that city. But what I am saying is we hear constantly, and you hear it on the Twitter sphere, you hear it in person, you hear it from other people, you hear it from people who want to help the GOP. There seems to be, or who seemingly want to help the GOP, a transactional relationship where you give me something and I'll let you in. You give me something and I'll let you in. That's not an indictment on any specific group of people, because we saw it, I saw it across multiple groups of people. But what I am saying is that for a community that is hurting, a community that has many, many problems that are political in nature, that are hurting them, from education to crime to just a change in political leadership might make all the difference. It was very, very challenging to get into some of these places. This idea that they never come, you hear that, Republicans never come to visit. No.
They're not allowed.
We came to visit, I'm telling you. And I have at least seven circumstances where we tried to visit and we were denied entry.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, AK.
Yeah.
If you're a rank and file member of a minority community in North Minneapolis, how do you connect with the political process? If you feel like what happens is you get an occasional candidate visit once every 4 years where they want you to cast your ballot in the correct manner, and they'll maybe throw $300,000 at refacing a new building or maybe building a new YMCA or something like that. How would that rank and file person living in North Minneapolis translate their vote, their concerns, their energy to real actionable impact?
Yeah, so I'm going to say this, and this is no slight to any of the effort that you or Max or anybody from the Jensen campaign put into this, but the problem is that there is a finite amount of resources and a finite amount of time, And so the effort that I saw that your campaign put into going to Minneapolis, St. Paul, going to areas that we get killed, by 40 percentage points was more than I've ever seen before. But one of the things that I said, talking to both Reverend Tim Christopher, also I can't remember the other guy's name, but he came to an event and he's like, you should have been here 4 months ago. You should have been here 5 months ago. And there's an aspect that, yes, to that degree, but here's the thing that I said. The MNGOP, right, like they should have a vested interest of at least trying to do actually something to have a way to reach out to people in the community. Because your question is, how do you get to rank and pass the gatekeepers? Because let's be very candid, gatekeepers exist, and they exist because it is a money-making scheme. If you live in an area in which everyone throws you pity dollars, and you can continue to have your favored nonprofit getting money in which you don't have to show any results for, then you're going to continue to not perform to the level that you should. And so in order to get around the gatekeepers, people in the community have to say, we don't want the gatekeepers. I believe in the power of the people. But the only way that you're ever going to have any influence or impact is you actually have to start being in the community right now. So like if the MNGOP has anyone that's paying attention, they need to be there right now building inroads with people in the community, and you're not going to ever get past the gatekeepers unless the people support you, because the people are the ones that make this thing run. But the gatekeepers are really good at stopping the events from occurring. But if you're going and you're knocking on people's door, there's no gatekeepers. Now, sure, you might have a group that shows up and says, hey, like this is a really unsafe area, so you got to pay us for security or whatever it is. But again,
which happened.
Right, but you have to play the game, right? But that's the point, is that it's hard, and then this is the question. There's a finite amount of resources, a finite amount of time. So you don't want to know the people that need to be the ones in the community? I'm going to say it, Laverne Turner, okay? He needs to get his apparatus together because he knows the community. I'm not from North Minneapolis, okay? I live in Forest Lake. I'm from Devil's Lake, North Dakota. But I grew up poor, and I understand what it's like to live in low-income subsidized housing and to be on the system. But that's the thing, is you have to incentivize. And so this is not an issue that Dr. Jensen can ever fix. I'm sorry, it just doesn't exist. You can put all the time, effort, and energy, but this has to start now. And that's how I feel, and that hopefully that answers your question of how do you get around the gatekeepers. The people that live in the community that actually understand your message, they have to fight like hell right now and not take no for an answer, so they can actually do something in the community. And that's the only hope that we have, but I think it's possible.
Right, and that is the conundrum that you face when you're running a campaign, right? Because we say all this, and hindsight is 20/20, right? Where you're sitting here going, hey, we invested so-and-so amount of money, time, blood, sweat, tears, Jensen's time, Burke's time into trying to do outreach, right? Yep. But because there is so little apparatus outside of a campaign unit, the campaign is therefore responsible. I mean, keep in mind, it wasn't a bunch of Tim Wall's TV ads that you saw. It was a bunch of outside apparatus TV ads that you saw. So what you're given is, hey, can I do outreach in North Minneapolis as a campaign unit? Or should I be spending $1.5 million in Greater Minnesota to ballot chase?
Yeah, to ballot chase and get 90% of the vote in the 8th congressional district.
And I'll tell you what, it's like, if you have a struggling community in Minneapolis, but we're chasing ballots in Greater Minnesota, just understand we may win, but who's going to have more political power if we do win? Yep. That's kind of how it goes.
Yep.
I'll just close with one comment, and I think it reaffirms what you're saying. I think it's interesting that in CD5, I think that Omar won 75-25, approximately, maybe 75-24.
That's right. Yeah.
And she barely won her primary. What, 2 points?
Something like that.
Yeah, 2 points.
Yeah.
So,
like 3,000 votes or something like that.
Yeah. So I feel like I would have thought that Omar was a weakened candidate going into the general, and that she wouldn't be able to win 75-25. And yet she did. And I think it speaks to your point. I think that I'm going to guess that this ambiguous set of gatekeepers you referred to, AK, they're probably intersecting with Omar's campaign at some level.
Oh, for sure.
And in so doing, that allows Omar to really run the table. And what that means is C.C. Davis, who worked her tail off, wasn't able to make a large inroads into that number. And it also means that all the statewide candidates weren't able to tap into a greater proportion of the votes in CD5 as well. And I remember seeing those numbers that night, election night, and I remember my heart sank seeing Omar perform so strong, because arguably she has made some astonishing statements over the last 2 years that you would have thought might have come back to haunt her. But she won in 2022 as handily as she won previously.
Probably more so. I think. And
the
like
apparatus, man, it was tuned up, baby.
Yeah, it's the apparatus. I would just say though, and what was her primary opponent's name? The gentleman who challenged
Don Samuels.
Don Samuels, right? So Don Samuels barely lost. So you're sitting here going, well, could there be room for a more reasonable choice, right? I mean, you obviously have people in St. Louis Park certainly who are looking at what Ilhan Omar is and saying, that's not exactly what we want. But the gap between that more reasonable Democrat candidate and that R next to your name is gigantic.
It is.
And I think the apparatus, that's issue number one, all right? The ballot chasing in Minnesota and elsewhere, to me, that is something you can help control, you can get your hands around, you can get funding behind, etc. This is another thing that I want to say, though, is that I believe that R next to your name right now is extremely toxic. It's extremely toxic. We have an extremely toxic brand for a number of reasons, right? People will want to blame Donald Trump, and that's certainly part of the case now. But I do believe in a place like Minnesota, where we are a blue state. We're a blue state.
Yep,
I don't care what anyone says.
Yep.
We're a blue state, so you got to sneak one through. The apparatus matters, the structure matters, playing the game matters, etc. But our brand right now is pretty severely damaged because I think we are viewed as a party of chaos. I do, which is incredible to think about. When you have Tim Walz, who was at the helm of the riots in 2020 and did nothing about them, you had Jacob, and then Tim Walz blames Jacob Fry. Jacob Fry gets reelected in a landslide. Right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
You have candidates like Victor Martinez, right, who is a pro-law enforcement Democrat, almost gets the endorsement because you have some reasonable people in Minneapolis still who are not willing to pull the lever, loses his election. You have Mary Moriarty get elected as Hennepin County Attorney. She is as radical as it comes. Okay,
Tessa Boudin, but a woman.
Yeah, right. So, like, what that says to me is it says that people are actually willing to pull the lever against their own perceived self-interest. Because this is a classic example. What did they say about Jai Hansen? Jai Hansen ran as an independent, but what did they say about him?
Oh, he's a conservative,
it's a Republican.
Right-winger. Yeah.
It's a closet Republican. It's a Trumper.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he lost his primary. Yeah. And he should not have.
Right.
He should have been on that final two.
Yeah. So I wanted to just throw something out there, and this is just a personal thing that bugs me to no end. I think that Kendall Qualls, great dude, had a million conversations, but there's this knee-jerk reaction that people are like, well, you guys are talking about, minority votes, and if Kendall was out there, he would have won. No, he wouldn't have.
That is so wrong.
Like, it's just, that's not how it works. And I think there's nothing wrong with Kendall, but I think that, to your point, right, you got an R by your name. And so I know a lot of people, I've seen it, they're like, well, if Kendall would have been the candidate, would have won all the black votes. That's not true. It would not have happened. People, they seem to just not understand, like, they're like, well, Walz is white and Kendall is black. He would have got all the votes. Like, I'm sorry, man. That's not how it works. I'm not saying anything about what his message would have been or anything, but to think that automatically if you just insert Kendall, then that's the magic ticket. I'm just saying that's not how it works because of all of the other things that we're saying. So it's a good question. So thank you for the question, but I don't think that actually changes anything. But right. I did want to kind of ask that question. Did Kendall help do anything, or does Kendall have an apparatus in Minneapolis, St. Paul with the CRT stuff that he was doing?
No. He doesn't. He doesn't.
I think it's a good question.
You don't have to throw him under the bus.
Listen, Kendall was Kendall for how that I won. I love Kendall Qualls.
Yeah.
I think he's a good man. of good character. How that endorsement went down, that was rough.
Yeah.
It was, that was a blood feud. That was closer to a WWE match than it was, a political endorsement process. Kendall was very helpful on our campaign. He came alongside of us. He's a team player. He's still a team player. He's got a political future,
But to say he would win Minneapolis or St. Paul, I don't think that's correct.
I would ask you guys would know better than we would.
What I would say is, if Minnesota had been an isolated microcosm, I think that question would have had even more, if you will, laser focus need to be answered. But this was literally a nationwide phenomenon. Florida, with DeSantis and Rubio, was really the only arguable, really a bright spot. What happened on election night? We talked about a red wave, and then it was going to be a red ripple, then it was back to a red wave. Arguably, it was a blue wave. I mean, the Democrats at the U.S. Senate level have as much or more than they had before. On an interim election, we barely won the House at the national level in Minnesota and many other places. Liberal governors that were on the hot spot won handily. And even in Arizona, where Carrie Lake had a lot of national attention, and it looked like she might prevail, she as well lost. I think when you see 90% of precincts that have colleges in them going to the Democrats and 10% to the Republicans. I think there's a precinct in Maricopa County where 94% of the voters voted for Hobbs, 6% voted for Carrie Lake. Boy, you've got to make up that distance in a big way in a whole lot more precincts. So I think that I think Kendall is. I would agree with Max. He's an articulate, well-spoken individual with a powerful moral compass, and he and his wife Sheila have done fantastic work. I would hope that we could all elevate the work they're doing over the next couple of years, because Kendall will tell you, and I think he said this statistic multiple times. You go back to the 1960s, and 80% of black families had two parents in them. Mm-hmm. You go today and look at it. 80% of black families have only one parent. This is a huge issue. Between the family, the faith, and the education, every minority community has to be provided as much as is possible the support necessary to make those three key factors work in favor of the family and the kids. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I think that you could say that nobody is doing enough. But I think Kendall and Sheila Qualls are doing outstanding work.
Yeah, that's great work. I'm just saying, when it comes to Minneapolis and Hennepin County, just that comment, you're not going to win a certain group based on your race when it comes to that.
I
don't think I got all the Norwegians voting for me.
No, you may have lost the Norwegians.
Thanks a lot, Max.
Knowing the nature, right? But I will just say, if you want to make the case that another candidate, Kendall or whomever, would have done a better job because they were a blanker slate than Scott Jensen, I think that's more compelling.
Sure.
I think that's more compelling than black people vote for black people.
Right.
I still think me personally, I still think we lose statewide. I still think what have you. That $50 million is coming no matter what candidate.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
And what you look like.
That freight train is coming no matter what candidate you are. But maybe that's a reality. But I would just say again, we made as a campaign committee, an immense amount of effort in places that we were never supposed to make an immense amount of effort in. And it did not pay off. We did, just to be clear, we did 150-ish thousand votes better in greater Minnesota. If you look at charts comparing 2018 performance to this year's performance, even in half the counties that we won, Trump performance versus our performance, greater Minnesota counties were going up and more Republican. But we got crushed. We got crushed in Hennepin County. We got crushed in Ramsey County. And as soon as those returns came in, I think Scott knew. That's when I knew. It was going to be a rough night. It was going to be a rough night. And it, the inroads that we tried to make did not make a difference.
Yeah. And I ultimately, I know we've gone over quite a bit, and everyone that's hung out so far is
Yes.
super awesome. I think,
And thank you guys for staying.
we're going on like an hour and like 40 minutes. Just free.
I have a small idea of what eternity feels like now.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to grab another drink.
Just keep on freewheeling. But honestly, let's just kind of shout out a couple of things. With what you do, Max. I know you do a lot of stuff kind of behind the scenes, but I just think that the amount of work and energy that I've seen you put in, because, I'm a Politico and whatever, mad respect, man. Like, you got crazy energy, you got a wife, you got kids, you're running your business, and you just have a passion for making Minnesota a better place. And so I just want to shout out and just thank you, man, for everything that you've done. There's always going to be haters. Like, I think haters are funny. And actually there's some fans that I've interacted with, and I always say, listen, like no one's perfect, and whenever someone loses, someone wants to kind of point the finger and blame at someone or institution. But I think you've done a great job. Also, again, Dr. Jensen, I think you are one of the most honestly genuine candidates that I've ever interacted with, and I've interacted with a lot of them. It used to be Tim Pawlenty, okay? Tim Pawlenty was one of the most genuine guys that I've ever interacted with. If I saw him, he remembered my name from the first time that I saw him, and I would talk. Anytime I would see him, he would ask me questions about my family. And you actually now have replaced T-Paw. And that says a lot, because I'm a person that cares about connections and genuineness, because people are full of shit. In politics, people just want your vote, a lot of people, and they want power. And that's what their main goal is they want power, and that's all that matters to them. You're a person that genuinely cares about actually trying to make things better, and that honesty of who you are. So I just, again, hopefully this is a love fest, but these are genuine feelings. I'm not getting paid anything from you. I've never received a penny from anything in the Jensen campaign, and that's just the truth. I just think you two are awesome, and everything that you did. Is there anything that you want to shout out? Any events you have coming up, or other people's events that you want to shout out or anything like that?
Well, I'll just say to your point, got over the haters a long time ago, right? But I've had haters long before this campaign. But it's funny. The number one critique I got was, "Hey, why aren't you controlling Jensen? Hey, why aren't you controlling Matt Burke?" And I was like, "Hey, if you think that's possible, if you want to come on in, heavy is the head that wears the crown, right?
No doubt, yeah.
But no, I don't have anything specifically that I want to shout out. I think Scott's got an event next week, a mask off event or health freedom event or something to that effect. I'll give him the floor.
Yeah, I think a week from Sunday was that December? I don't know what the Sunday is. Is that the 8th? I don't know. A week from Sunday, we're going to be having an event highlighting parental rights, health freedom.
Like the 10th or 11th, I think.
Yeah, in Bloomington, and it's on our Facebook page. But it's going to be a panel. I think it's remarkable that last week Tony Fauci was asked about, do you think schools may need to be shut down in January? And he said he can't say for sure. And that's astonishing. And then I think last week in the Star Tribune, there was a front page article about the potential need going back to wearing masks.
Remasking.
And all I would say is this. Folks, we have had viral winter respiratory outbreaks, epidemics, and even pandemics for decades and centuries. There was good data and good experiments done from 2002 to 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The SARS coronavirus 1 in 2002 has many, if you will, morphologic similarities, looks a lot like the COVID-19 viral particle. And there was true consensus across the globe that wearing a mask would not provide prevention against getting the disease. It would potentially provide a filtration ratio, perhaps 16%, perhaps 20%, maybe 30%, maybe in an N95 mask, well-fitted, worn consistently, maybe it would provide you 60%. But for people to be told that doing this thing would prevent them from getting the disease cost a lot of people their lives. So part of the reason I'm part of this panel a week from Sunday is because we need to keep talking about these things. We cannot let the contrarian narrative be diminished as conspiracy theorist nonsense. It's not. There's a lot of perspectives to be considered, and we've got to keep talking about them.
Absolutely.
Last thing for me, I want to know, whoever the next Minnesota GOP chair is, what advice do you give them as far as helping candidates? If it had to come down to a quick 30 seconds each, moving forward.
The next MNGOP chair, I don't think should be focused entirely on operational details. I think that person needs to be, she or he needs to be a cheerleader for the conservative cause, and needs to be an ambassador, and needs to provide oversight, and needs to lead the way in terms of generating dollars and donations and contributions. The advice that person should give to candidates is, one, make sure that if as much as is possible, the whole family is, yes, let's do this. That'd be number one. Number two is identify your moral compass and never let it be violated. And number three, contact Max Rymer so he can tell you how to message, because I don't think there's anybody in the state of Minnesota that knows how to do political messaging in the arena of social media and other places, as well as generating opportunities to fundraise through small dollar donors, than Max's company, Native. And that's sounds like a plug for him, but it's because I worked with that guy for 2 years and I saw him do what would, in many eyes, be considered nearly impossible, and he got it done.
Yeah. Max, do you have anyone that you're hedging your bets for MNGOP chair?
If I were a state central delegate, I think as of right now, you have 2 candidates, 3 candidates,
Because Murphy dropped, so you have Han and then Parrish,
yeah. And then one other gentleman announced very, very recently. Okay. No, I respect David. I love, I like a lot of the people on the team over there. I'm rooting for an earnest race where we talk about different visions and things of that nature. I'm certainly glad that I'm not a Minnesota State Central delegate anymore. I got elected by that body, and I love all of those people. These are really the people who put in blood, sweat, and tears. No matter how imperfect their opinion may be, a lot of them or what have you. Yeah. I sat through a lot of the drama that happened with the previous regime, and saw just a lot of hard times that transitioned into running a campaign. Again, the last 2.5, 3 years of my life have been pretty crazy. But what I would say, is advice is, you are not at the MNGOP, and this is for the state central body as much as it is for whoever the next chair is. You're not a messaging arm. You have to have grace for your candidates. Our platform should be on a placard, and it should be a vague 7-point platform, by which candidates can fit into. The purity testing, the messaging, dictation that Jai had referenced earlier, I think we need to move away from that. And your job at the MNGOP, I would say, is straight up activity and ballot chasing. And if you need to do that for judges, if you need to get low-hanging fruit wins in Minnesota to prove that you're worth, existence, that's what you need to do. It's not about messaging. It's not about... I'm really of the mind, I might be a little extreme at this point, but I'm really of the mind that it's not really even about platform. Your candidates are going to have an appropriate platform. But I would be interested in a future where... and this might be controversial too, where the endorsement process is either moved up, changed, or doesn't mean as much.
Sure.
And that's not to say that Scott Jensen, or who was my choice, obviously, would not have won in a primary. But I think we need to not shy away from the idea of an earlier primary. Moving our process up so we're not hitting each other over the head for as long. again, we're saying we have an August primary, and then early voting starts in mid-September. You're talking about a 45-day window where you actually have to campaign against the DFL if we're serious about the ballot chasing thing.
Yep.
So, honestly, that's advice like slow your roll a little bit. In places like Texas, right? Texas, they got an early primary, but they still have a convention to fulfill RNC, delegates and things of that nature. But your convention is a celebration of the candidate who just won a primary.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
That doesn't sound terrible.
No.
I
That
think
doesn't sound terrible.
those are awesome ideas. Now, you don't have to make a comment on this, but is there just a little portion of you that wishes you were RNC committeeman so you could cast your vote for Mike Lindell? Oh man, I love
Turn
it.
out
I
the
love
lights.
it.
The party's over.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure that you hit the like button, share. Again, this is an amazing conversation. So many people tuned in, and we appreciate all of the interactions that we had. We went super long. If you're listening on audio, again, you can find us anywhere where podcasts are available. We upload our podcasts Monday mornings around 8 a.m., so catch it there. But you can share this live stream, whether here on Facebook or on YouTube. Please do that. And make sure you have a great rest of your week. Jai, do you have anything else you want to leave us with, bro?
No, I just want to say thank you to both of you. Scott, I've been a huge supporter of you and a friend to both of you. So thank you for what you gave up for the last 2 years to do this.
Thank you. And if you're going to be getting me gifts, I wear a size medium shirt.
I'm AK Kamara.
I'm Jai Hansen.
And you've been listening to Black and Blue with AK and Officer Jai. Be well. Take care.